Okay, cool. Yay. Okay, cool. So welcome everybody. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. I'm super excited to be with you today for this session about money. So we're going to talk about how can we move money from away from polluters, and what we mean by polluters is essentially the fossil fuels industry. And my name is Paula. Je m'appelle Paula. Don't worry, I'm not going to translate everything from French to English, but today it's a bit special because not only we are live streaming this session on Green is the New Black, which is a media platform I'm about to introduce you, but also on a French initiative which is called Le Monde d'Après. So thank you so much to Adrien and his team for having given us this opportunity. So a bit about me. So as I said, I'm Paula. I'm one of the founders of Green is the New Black, and we are a media platform, and we promote conscious living, and we've been doing so in Asia for 7 years, and we're now coming to Europe, and we're doing it by creating content, providing a lot of resources. Okay, I think I was not live. What's going on? Tech issues. Always tech issues. Are we live now? Ben, je crois qu'il n'est pas parti. I think the live didn't start. There's an issue.
Il n'y a pas encore de live.
No, sorry guys. That I haven't started. Okay, we're good on Zoom, but not on Facebook and stuff. Okay. Hi Andrew, hi Marco, hi Leanne. Okay, I can hear you in London. That's good. Let me see. Sorry guys, we're just gonna wait for 5 minutes because we're supposed to be live also on other platforms on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you so much for being here. Hi Mayur, Jessica. So still not, let me see on the other platform. Oof. Non, c'est bon. Sorry about this tech issue. So we have 20 participants. Yay. If you guys, so from the crowd, if you want to introduce yourself maybe on the chat, and you can just say what you're looking for today on the session. And we'll try to address your questions at the end on the chat. Okay, so we're still trying to figure out everything. I don't know where I'm live because it's on so many different platforms. I'm really sorry. It's the beauty of going live on many platforms, but I don't know where I'm live because it's on so many different platforms. Okay, Allô? Allô, allô? Oui. Okay, let's start. Sorry about that, everyone. So again, I'm really sorry for this tech issue. This happened just because we were supposed to be live on so many different platforms, but that's fine. Let's do it. So today we're going to talk about moving away our money from polluters. And today it's our sixth session of a series that we called Create Real Change from Home. And we decided to create this series because yes, there is a big pandemic happening out there, but there's even a bigger threat, which is called climate change, that everybody should be discussing about. And we just thought about this series, which will be an online series with speakers from all around the world. So myself, I'm based in France, and I have with me amazing panelists Alex and Ben, who both coming from New Zealand and the UK, but both are based in London at the moment. And as I said, we're going to talk about money, and we're going to ask two sets of questions. And the first set of questions will be about understanding the macro picture and understanding, okay, climate change, where do emissions come from? What's the link between emissions, climate change, and our banking system? And especially banks, but also central banks. And the second set of questions we wanted to ask was all about what can we do as individuals? And, you know, do we really have the power to make the change, even if I only have $200 as savings in my banking account? So I hope you will feel empowered at the end of the session. I'm again with me, Alex and Ben, so I'm going to introduce them. So Alex works for Campbell Lutyens, which is an independent advisory capital firm, and they've been specializing in impact investment. And since 2014, Alex has raised $3 billion US, right, to fund sustainable infrastructures. And Ben works for ECO, which is a consultancy designing climate resilient and low carbon projects and programs, and also based in London. You can see them both as experts into moving big bucks, so billions of dollars, into funding what should be the new normal, so sustainable infrastructures. So let's just jump straight into the conversation, and I'm going to ask the first questions to you both guys. If you can unmute yourself, you know, very quickly. if you can introduce yourself in 1 minute, and also maybe share what is the project that you are the most proud of. So Alex, let's start with you.
So yeah, like you say, I work at a firm called Campbell Lutyens, and I sit, it's really fundraising, so I sit between specialist investment firms and they're our clients, and we raise capital for them from institutional investors. So we take them to meet with sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, insurance firms, governments, to raise capital to invest in niche strategies. So in particular, I focus on, as you say, sustainable investment. I've done some work in biotech and life sciences, but really the core of what I've done is greenfield infrastructure. That's building infrastructure rather than building infrastructure that wasn't there before, as opposed to just buying pre-existing infrastructure. The project I'm most proud of, I think in 2014, I started working on an African infrastructure fund to build infrastructure across sub-Saharan Africa. And it was hard work. It was not an area that was particularly attractive to a lot of investors at the time. And it was a long slog, but we got there. We raised $500-600 million for them. And now looking back at it and working with the same client now, we can see the fruits of that. So there are solar plants being built in Senegal and geothermal plants being built in Ethiopia, and biomass plants or being built in Abidjan, and sort of creating jobs and making a real impact in a sustainable way.
Nice, thank you very much. Ben?
Thanks, Alex, and also thank you, Paula, for introducing the company. I won't go into too much details about what we do, but we are a consulting firm. We are uniquely specialized in designing low carbon projects that resolve issues around adaptation, climate adaptation, which is adapting to the effects of climate change, and also mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions challenges, and accessing project funding for our clients, for governments, for beneficiaries. Very similar to what Alex does, we bring the money, we design the projects that bring the money to those that most need it, but also to governments and private sector to help investment. Mostly working in developing countries, but also in some developed countries as well. We do things like assess markets to understand how to establish a market for a renewable energy product, for energy efficiency products, for technologies, but also for things like climate resilient seeds that could be more resilient to changes in weather patterns caused by climate change and things like that, but also sustainable infrastructure. Prior to that, I worked for the United Nations Development Program doing very similar things. Project that I'm most proud of is probably some of the ones we do in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, sort of a broad spectrum of projects to adapt to the effects of climate change, where you will see that the beneficiaries of those projects are some of the most vulnerable populations, some of the poorest populations, and they're able to actually develop sustainable businesses, sustainable business models, and actually make money from an opportunity, something that was actually a threat before. So yeah, and also being able to strike a gender balance in these projects as well, focusing on women's groups and cooperatives and things like that.
Beautiful, thank you. So let's stay with you, Ben. I just wanted to, just remind the audience, maybe in your own words, what is climate change and where do most of the emissions out there come from? Which industries?
Okay, well, that's a very open-ended question, so I hope I don't talk about it for too long. Climate change is a catchphrase, we could say, for the long-term changing weather phenomena that we're experiencing due to an increase in global average temperature. There are the causes of climate change and the effects. I'll start with the causes. So climate change is really the long-term shifts in average weather patterns. So what we're observing on an average basis across the world. Since basically the mid-1800s, the Industrial Revolution, humans have contributed to the release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the air through doing things such as burning fossil fuels, deforestation, land use change, cutting down trees, things like this, intensification of agriculture. And this has only increased recently with international trade and globalization. So when these gases build up, they effectively create a blanket trapping heat, and that heat is trying to return back through the atmosphere, known as infrared heat, radiation around the Earth, and that's what's causing the greenhouse effect. So the blanket is the greenhouse. Now that in turn causes global temperatures to rise and results in long-term changes to climate. Even if we were to stop all of our emissions today, we cannot avoid some level of global warming. The amount of warming we'll see from now into the future really depends on the changes that we make today. So that's what I think we're really here to talk about. So, you know, there's things that we can do like switch to renewable energy. We can also use land more sustainably. And we may need to use, you know, technologies that are under development now we thought about into the future to remove carbon dioxide from the air. But climate change is also goes beyond the causes. There's also the effects, rising sea level, increased temperatures, causing glaciers to melt and ice sheets to melt. Also ocean acidification, which occurs when the oceans absorb more carbon dioxide and become more acidic. This is often called the evil twin of climate change, and that's another cause. Climate change also causes things, as we know, extreme weather to become more intense and more frequent, such as heat waves, droughts, floods. It can also cause ecosystems and flooding, ecosystems to fail and flooding coastal regions. And we're seeing things like wildfires in Australia at unprecedented levels, global food shortages, and the ability of the global poor and most vulnerable to adapt to those changes is extremely low. So those are some of the effects of climate change. And you also asked where do most greenhouse gas emissions come from? Well, humans are responsible for climate change. When looking at the evidence, there's a large scientific consensus of that. Most of the world's greenhouse gas emissions actually come from a relatively small number of countries, namely China, the US, and nations that make up the European Union are the three largest emitters on an absolute basis. On a per capita basis, as in per person, greenhouse gas emissions are the highest in the United States and Russia. When we think about the G20, which is a group of economies which includes 19 countries and all the member states of the European Union, globally they make up 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions and 85% of the global economy.
Yeah, crazy. And in terms of, I think, industry, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it's 25% of emissions come from the way we produce electricity, and then 24 there's about from agriculture, and then we have industry and transportation. So my point was also to make a link between the way we produce electricity and the way we do everything from eating to moving from point A to point B. Everything includes burning fossil fuels, or pretty much. So I wanted to make the link between that and our banking system. So Alex, can you just walk us through what is the link between the fossil fuel industry and our banking system?
So I think at its most basic level, what banks do is they sit between people who have capital and who have money to invest, and they connect those people and organizations who have projects to invest in and who need money. So they do this for basically every industry. And with fossil fuels, it's a very, very capital intensive business. They're for two reasons, really. One is that things like oil rigs are huge. You go and see some of these things in action. They are the scale of the infrastructure required to extract fossil fuels on the scale that we do is mind-boggling, and the infrastructure required to move millions and millions of barrels of oil a day around the world is just staggering. So it's a very capital intensive business, and the people that so there's a lot of opportunity for banks to raise money for oil extracting organizations. The other fact I think that has come into play recently is that that oil is in particular because it's an extractive industry, it has quite a quick sort of recycling of capital, so that if I raise money to go and dig an oil well in the Permian Basin in the US, I raise my money, I go and dig my well, I pump the oil out and I sell it, and then I go and do the same again, and probably in 2 or 3 years I've given the money back that I've already raised, and I need to raise fresh capital. So they need a lot of money and they churn through it very quickly. This makes them ideal clients for banks, because banks take a cut of every dollar they raise, so they can raise a lot. They can take a cut of a big slice, and they can take a cut of a big slice very frequently. So really, I think the banks, what they do is they facilitate it. Without the financial infrastructure in place, these organizations wouldn't be able to function on the scale that they do.
Yes,
I think one point I should make there is that, just perhaps for clarification, is that they do also invest to some extent themselves, but I think people overestimate the extent to which JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are themselves putting money into fossil fuels. It is much more the playing the pipes and the wires of the financial world, and the introductions, than the actual providing of capital.
Yeah. So if this indefinite chase to the bigger the projects are, the most profitable they will be to banks. So the bigger they need to grow, so on and so forth, and we cannot stop the machine in a way. I mean, that's my little way to recap. So I came across like a study made from an NGO, which says that there were 35 banks which invested 2.7 trillion of US dollar in the fossil fuel industry just after the Paris Agreement. So between 2016 to 2019, that's insane. I can't even imagine what $1 trillion is. So why is that, especially after the Paris Agreement?
For sure, I think that's a really, really important question. I think, firstly, I think it's important just to clarify what that number is. So when we're talking about them investing $2.7 trillion, these 35 banks, again, that's not them actually investing it themselves. That's facilitating the investment. So if we take a specific example, last year, it's been many years in the making, but Saudi Aramco, the world's largest company, it is basically the corporate entity that digs oil out of the grounds in Saudi Arabia. They had their IPO, for which banks raised them $25 billion. So in October last year, banks went out and raised $26 billion for Saudi Aramco. Now that will count towards your 2.7 trillion, so 1% of it or something. But that's not, I think it's not them themselves investing in that. That's taking the Saudis around to introduce them to pension funds and sovereign wealth funds and insurers. My point here is that they are the middlemen. So why have they done this? Why have they been able to invest 2.7 trillion in fossil fuels? It's because their clients, as I said earlier, these very profitable clients are asking them to raise money for them. And more importantly, because there are still people that want to invest in this. the notion that banks have 2.7 trillion to invest themselves just doesn't work. Who does have it are, as I say, pension funds, governments, insurers, university endowments, and it's these people who are still willing to invest in fossil fuels as well. I think going back to the Saudi Aramco example, $26 billion is a staggering amount of money to raise for fossil fuel investment. It's the largest IPO there's ever been. But it wasn't viewed as a success by many people. They had wanted to raise 100 billion, and there just wasn't the demand for it for a number of factors. Part of the reason was that institutional investors just don't have the same demand for fossil fuels that they did a long time ago, several years ago. So they are still raising money for it, but it is trending in the right direction. And I do think that there has been a lessening in demand for fossil fuel investments,
which is a good sign.
Yeah,
Ben,
sure. Sorry, just perhaps one more point there. I think is the reason they've done this, they've raised such a large amount of money, is because it's their business and because they can make money doing it. There are people that want capital to invest in fossil fuels, the likes of Saudi Aramco. You're not really going to stop those guys wanting to dig oil out of the ground. But the other two factors that allow them to raise such a staggering amount of money, as I said, are the people that want to invest in it and the regulations and the regulatory regimes that allow people to. And as long as those factors are all in place and banks can still make money, they'll do it. Now, they probably made about a third of what they wanted off of that deal last year. Banking revenues as a result of oil and gas are down significantly. And I think as investor appetite for it diminishes, as banks can see it as a less profitable industry for themselves, then we'll start to see that go down further.
Okay, so yeah, the oil and gas industry is not as profitable, so the banks are not willing to invest, and then this is how we can create, a good ending. Ben, feel free to add anything if you want to add on what Alex was saying, or if we can just jump onto the other question.
No, I just agree. I completely agree with what he said. We do need to create the environment where it is no longer as profitable to invest in fossil fuels industry. And if we just look at the cost of the cost of investing in renewables now, and I might speak on that a little later, it's becoming cheaper and cheaper, and there's less and less reason to be investing in fossil fuels these days.
Yeah. So Ben, you just brought up a very interesting point. So currently, there's COVID-19 and all of the governments and central banks, they're talking about these recovery packages. So for instance, in Europe, there's Christine Lagarde, which is leading the Central European Bank. I think they're about to release 750 billion euros. So how do we make sure that this money do not go to the wrong organizations and to the wrong industries? And what can we do as individuals? Well,
first of all, this is precisely the type of question I like to hear, and what we want to do at ECO as well is get behind initiatives like this as well. You may be aware the NGO 350.org has just written a letter like a template letter that can actually be sent to Christine. And there's also other there's also many other things that you can do. So this so asking local politicians and governments to ensure that these COVID-19 recovery plans are sustainable and help meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord is precisely what needs to happen. Citizens need to make demands of particular industries. Besides making conscious choices, or as your organization has well developed little green steps, you can also start pushing you know, governments and imploring them to make those types of steps. Unlike the coronavirus, there is really no vaccine that countries are racing to in order to fix climate change. And whilst mobilizing emergency response to this is important, both for medical and also financial assistance to companies that are facing issues right now in communities and workers and businesses, governments around the world are also very quickly designing some of the biggest long-term economic stimulus packages ever seen, like bigger than the Great Depression. And, you know, while COP26, which is the Conference of the Parties, which is the international annual meeting of global governments to discuss and agree upon climate change, whilst that's been cancelled, in its absence, governments really need to take leadership roles and demonstrate how COVID-19 recovery can actually amplify their climate commitments. Yeah, governments should simply pair recovery action with climate action so that they can emerge stronger than before, which means attaching climate targets to money that is going to be dispersed to bail out industries such as airlines, such as manufacturing, agriculture as well, designing policies and spending measures that actually are going to create jobs and drive economic recovery, whilst also reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the same time, and building resilience to the effects of climate change. I think this is the perfect opportunity to do that. And while some of the world's 20 biggest economies, such as Britain, France, Germany, and others have made statements about doing this, some of the biggest emitters, like China and the United States, are yet to do so. So, you know, as a global citizen, you also have the power to locally be involved in pushing politicians to do that as well. And I think, you know, at ECO, we take that as a responsibility of ours, and we've been doing things like what 350.org has done and prepared templates, which you can share with politicians and things like that. Also, private capital and your money, you know, is going to play a key role in the recovery. So, you know, you're the one that can make decisions about where your money is going to go as well. Just to make a note, the Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change, this is a group that manages trillions of dollars and includes organizations such as BlackRock, have written a statement saying recovery plans that exacerbate climate change would expose investors and national economies to escalating financial health and social risks in the years in coming years. And, you know, if some of the world's largest institutional investors are getting together and saying, seriously, governments start tying recovery packages to climate goals, otherwise we all risk financial losses and loss of life, you know, and further disruptions to economy. It's like one of the biggest no-brainers in the history of humankind. You know, so yeah, just to sum up, it's recovery money is best spent on creating jobs in a sustainable way that can help meet net zero carbon emissions across sectors. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. It's, as you said, it's becoming a no-brainer that solving climate change issues equal to more social justice, and that if we do that, we're also going to create more jobs, which will also solve the issue of unemployment created by the COVID-19. So everything makes sense now. Hopefully it will work, and we have the power to make the change. Okay, Alex, let's go to you to another question, which is more about, you know, when I choose my bank where I want to move my money, like, what should be the criteria and the kind of evidences I should just watch first when I select my bank? Knowing the fact that nowadays all of the banks are claiming that, you know, they're green in a way. A lot of the banks are saying that they stopped funding the fossil fuel industry, but what does it mean exactly? Maybe they only stopped to fund new opening of new coal plants, but they still give money to the fossil fuel industry. So how can we just navigate through this type of warnings?
At the moment, extremely difficult. I think it's a really important question, and it's something that that the financial industry as a whole is struggling with a lot. Institutional investors around the world, our bread and butter at Campbell Lutyens is talking to them about their investment programs, which more often than not includes what they think about sustainable investment, and people really struggle with the notion of how do I know what actually counts as something that's having a positive impact. I think there is a really strong sense that firms, as you say, everyone has sort of realized that you kind of need to be green these days, and people's marketing, it's very hard to differentiate someone who actually believes in it from someone who doesn't, because it's not regulated. There's no common agreement over what having a sort of positive environmental impact even means. So if we don't have the common language about how to talk about sustainability and sustainable finance, it becomes very difficult to be able to compare one product or one financial institution with another. And that's made many times worse when you I mean, it's one thing to look at a single investment on that basis. If you're comparing, if you're looking at a sort of an investment in a wind farm or something, it's very easy to decide whether or not you think that is environmentally friendly. But banks are extraordinarily complicated, famously just big black boxes, and you kind of have to take them at their word on many things. So I think what I would focus on specifically is it's hard to sort of vet a global bank as sort of green, given that they are so large and nebulous. I mean, even if they do sort of genuinely act in a environmentally responsible way, it's very hard to verify that. So in terms of choosing your specific bank, I'm afraid I don't have any concrete steps there, except perhaps to say that a lot of the sort of the newer neobanks, which are in smaller, more focused, you can get much better sense by doing your research, comparing some of these new institutions. You can, because they do much less and they're much newer, they tend to be easier to sort of vet. In terms of sort of choosing where to invest your money, perhaps we can come back to this, but I think it's so important to dig down into what people are saying, not to believe the label on the product at the moment. If someone is marketing something as environmentally friendly, unfortunately at the moment, if someone calls something an impact fund or an eco fund or an environmental fund, that means absolutely nothing. So what they do have to do is make it relatively easy for you to determine what that fund is invested in itself. So it should not be more than a question of a couple of clicks to figure out what your money is actually going into beyond the bank that you're working with, whatever platform you happen to be on. I think one of the encouraging signs here, though, is that this is a globally recognized problem, and it is something that global institutions, institutional investors are trying to fix, to come up with a common language. And more importantly, I think the EU is currently developing their own sort of, what do they call it? They call it a taxonomy, an EU taxonomy of financial investments, which will allow them to sort of force people to report on key environmentally relevant criteria of their financial products, and report them and disclose these criteria, and then also allow people to apply for hopefully an eco label for a financial product. So hopefully in 2021, the EU will be bringing out this sort of classification system, and there will be a sort of fairly rigid process behind that, to introduce some more rigor. But at the moment, it's a bit of a murky market, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and you were also, I mean, even though it's like super hard, you were also saying that again, we can just simply ask, you know, our banks and bankers, and we can just like simply, in the first place, just go to their website and yeah, do our research and ask them some questions and some clarifications.
Yeah.
So we've been focusing a lot on, you know, what was wrong in this industry, but I just wanted you, Alex, also to tell us, you know, you were excited about some innovations and exciting things which were happening in the finance sector. So can you just share a little bit about them?
Yeah, I think there is a real there is a real consensus growing that amongst financial institutions that this is something that they need to be investing in and committing to. I think we've seen probably since Paris, people really start to allocate money towards sustainable investment strategies and to renewable investment strategies. For partly political reasons, partly moral reasons, and I think also partly sort of economic reasons. I think a lot of the technologies have advanced to a stage where they're now so much more efficient than they were, that they can actually be run on a sort of cost, an economically efficient basis. You know, solar panels have probably fallen 95% in price over the last decade or something, and you know, doubled in efficiency. So an investment in a solar farm is now far more attractive than it was historically. And I think we're seeing from the EU putting lots of money into supporting green developments in infrastructure, and a lot of that money is focused on how to crowd in additional capital. So a lot of public institutions at the moment are coming up with a lot of interesting products, which essentially, you know, the EU or the European Investment Bank is a good example, where they'll come in and they will invest in a project at a sort of lower rate of return, enabling private sector, making it more attractive for commercial investors to come in. And sort of helping shift the risk reward in favor of environmental projects. So I think that sort of political support has been so helpful in mobilizing a lot of capital to go into it. Yeah, and I think also there's just a lot of new technology required, and a lot of new development required. Now we've seen it with solar farms and wind farms over the past 15-20 years. They've sort of exploded onto the scene, but those are clearly only one part of the energy transition solution. You know, there needs to be investment in car charging networks, and there needs to be battery storage or energy storage of any sort. So there are a huge amount of opportunities to put capital to work in sustainable solutions, and the financial world is increasingly seeking to provide investors with those opportunities. I can't tell you, I think we were having a conversation about this at work the other day, and I think we've had 18 new managers come to us seeking our help to work with them on renewable investment strategies. You know, there are a lot of managers out there who want to help investors put their money to work in a sustainable way.
Yeah,
and I think
I will just take the last question. Thank you so much, and it shows, yeah, that we're in the right direction. Just last question for you, Ben, and then after, please guys, if you have any questions on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, because now it's working, if you can let us know and we try to answer them at the end. So Ben, so let's just go back also on the Paris Agreement and on the type of project you're working on. So you said low carbon, climate resilient type of project. So if you had to describe a word with this kind of project, how will this word look like?
That's again,
And
it's like the climate change question. Well,
yeah.
if you take it if you look at it in a sectoral approach, and we try and tie it back again to COVID. So with the Paris Agreement in 2015, almost every single country agreed to limit the average global temperature to 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. And then we need to think about what is required in order to achieve that. And another thing that they also agreed upon was the fact that there should be an equal amount spent on adaptation, on adapting to the effects of climate change because of the impacts of those on developing countries and the most poorest populations, and their ability to respond to changing climate is a lot less than, for example, people that are in the major cities in the developed world. So how do we achieve that? Well, first of all, there needs to be climate finance provided, and this is an agreement. This is already agreed prior to Paris, that climate finance will be provided from developed countries to developing countries to target those types of projects. They can be across sectors. They can be mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they can also be adaptation, adapting to the effects. So going beyond renewables, you also have projects in agriculture, which look at things like innovative agroforestry techniques, which will help farmers adapt to changing climates, reduced water. There is silvopastoralism, which is where you have pastoralist smallholder farmers that are nomadic, for example, that are losing land. So these types of projects are the kinds of projects which we need to both utilize to adapt to the effects of climate change, but also to mitigate them as well. Developed countries and developing countries have very different tracks of the types of projects that they're going to do. But if we're to tie it back to COVID again, and I want to give a couple of examples of the work that people can personally do with their own capital, you can do things like advance the delivery of 100% clean energy. Make sure, and implore policymakers to invest in deploying renewable energy, storage, and grid solutions, so smart grids. They're also becoming very popular in sub-Saharan Africa and are absolutely critical for the types of solar infrastructure that they have there. They have smart grids that can store electricity, store energy, and release it when necessary. You can demand companies to go net zero. Shell, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, has been the first energy company to take the first big step. The real step is actually to stop new drilling. But let's see when that actually happens. But we need to implore those companies to look into those targets that they've made and to up them by a couple of percentage points, really, because otherwise we're not going to have a world that is less than 2 degrees warmer. Also, what me and you can do right now, we can in most developed countries, you can actually choose who your energy supplier is. Choose your supplier and make sure they're 100% renewable, or that their portfolio of energy, that electricity you have in your home is renewable. So you can choose those companies. You can choose clean mobility, which is electric vehicles. You can ask, don't just catch public transport and ride a bike. Yes, that's the basic thing you can do, but you can also encourage countries to make car manufacturers meet Euro level 6 emissions standards, for example. You can ask your governments to provide fiscal incentives, so financial incentives for those who will purchase electric vehicles. You can remove barriers to market for innovative new energy storage technologies and things like that. Another one is travel. In travel, airlines are set to get huge bailouts. Currently they're lobbying to rewrite the rules of a global agreement that they had to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, simply because they're stating that, this is a matter of life or death for the industry. Well, some say that they're trying to dodge obligations here, and the industry is saying it's a matter of survival. However, the agreement itself actually was proven, the agreement previously was proven not to be enough to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions in the airline industry. to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So we can't wind back this Corsair agreement anymore. Also, just to sum up, when we're talking about similarly like agribusiness and the livestock industry, they're likely to be huge recipients of large-scale government support. So we can look at new pathways and levels of engagement of developing drought-resistant farming, sustainable food systems, and also more humane and less dangerous means of bringing meat and poultry to consumers as well. Otherwise, you can also go vegetarian or vegan if you don't want to support those industries. Also, cities. Deliver zero carbon cities and infrastructure and buildings, energy efficiency. These are all sort of things that projects that we both do, and things that and develop in developing countries and developed countries have, but also things that anyone at home can encourage and participation, can implore local governments and politicians to rally behind.
Yeah, and these are little green steps which just prove that we can make a change again as individuals. So I love that. So we have a few questions from people. So the first question is about the planet of the humans. I don't know if you watched the last Michael Moore documentary. And if you did, the question is, what do you think about NGOs such as 350.org or Al Gore investing in dirty alternative sources of energy such as biomass?
Sure, I have seen it. I thought it made some very valid points, some good points in a very bad way. I thought it was fairly, talking about having one segment talking about electric cars, and that being based on the launch of a car that came out in 2011, I think is slightly disingenuous. And I think the market had moved on a long way from a lot of the facts raised there. That being said, I think it raised a lot of good points, most important of which is that that we talk about alternatives to energy as if it was, environmentally the solution, and actually no sort of form of energy will have no carbon footprints. It takes, wind farms are made out of fiberglass plastics. It takes energy, and coal goes and silicon go into making solar plants. These things are not carbon free. The real solution, the most effective way to fight climate change is to stop consuming. It's far, far, far better for the environment to stop using energy than it is to find a better way of producing it. I think that was my main takeaway from the documentary. I think it's actually a very valid point.
But for this, we need to find how to decouple growth from consumption, and that's another topic. Ben, I don't know if you watched this documentary, The Planet of the Humans, or if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I had a webinar that I did last week. I was actually told, you should watch that documentary before I give the webinar. And I still haven't watched it, I must admit, because I haven't found time. But from what I've heard, yes, let's look at it for what it really is. The cement industry that goes into sustainable transport, sustainable infrastructure, is actually responsible for 2% of the entire global greenhouse gas emissions, which is huge. But, is it a necessary evil? And that's what we need to be challenging and questioning. I heard that there were some very dangerous assumptions, and as Alex said, evidence that was used as a basis to defend, the fact that sustainable isn't sustainable, green energy, electric vehicles isn't the solution. But the problem is here that people will take this the wrong way and not take it for what it is. It's a YouTube documentary. Do your own research really into these things, and don't take everything for face value, which is absolutely what Michael Moore has done by the sounds of it with this documentary. And I think we do need industries, even sustainable industries, to be called out to be more sustainable. You have sustainable indexes and reporting standards and things that don't live up to their name. The recent H&M sustainable supply chain reporting thing is an example of that. On the face, it looks like they're really, really sustainable, but when you dig down into the surface, it's still the same unsustainable fast fashion practices that are going on that's causing a lot of the water and greenhouse gas emissions issues in the first place.
We're going to just take one or two last questions. So one question coming from Clément. So are the investment in large financial products really relevant for climate change? Do you want to, Alex or Ben, anyone?
Right, so you go.
Okay.
The large financial products, yeah.
So large financial products potentially, but financial products are absolutely critical in the transition to low emissions and resilient programs. Quite often, I mean, the private sector is the driver of this. Investment, unfortunately, is the way the economy works. And unless we're investing in the low emissions and climate resilient businesses and, you know, tree species or crops or whatever, it's not going to happen. And special financial products are necessary for that. Alex, do you want to add anything?
100%. I think the scale of what is required is just staggering. I mean, whichever country you happen to be in, think of the miles of motorways and the petrol network. That piece of infrastructure has been built up over decades and needs to be replaced in a few years. All of those, you know, we need to replace all of those petrol garages with electric car charging grids, and we need to make sure that those grids are powered by sustainable renewable energy. That is, it just, I mean, just talking about charging our cars is a extraordinarily large amount of money that is required in order to develop that. And I think, you know, we've seen in terms of financial products, we've seen the benefit that those have driven. The fossil fuel industry has a 200-year head start in terms of economic efficiency. Setting up a new technology is never going to compete on a cost basis without public support and without financial products. We've seen the benefit of that in renewables, in solar and wind, thanks to the sort of public subsidies and financial products developed early on to encourage investment. Those are now standalone technologies, which are extremely efficient and extremely cheap, but it required that early investment and that early structuring from a financial perspective to get the technology to the stage that it can actually fight this problem on a large global scale.
Thank you for that. We're about to finish just the live, so if you can, we can just stay on Zoom just to answer to a few more questions, but I'm just gonna make an announcement just live, just to say everyone, thank you so much for watching. Sorry for the tech issues at the start. Like every Wednesday, we're also celebrating at the end of our session 2 projects that we love, and today we wanted to celebrate Indosol, which is a fashion shoe brand made out of recycled tires. And it all started in Bali by 2 surfers, which were just fed up seeing a lot of trash on beaches, and it's now a worldwide fashion brand. So they showed and they proved that you could combine a circular fashion brand and being a cool and sexy brand. And especially during this time of COVID-19, due to the fact that there's a lot of Bali communities which are, you know, struggling at the moment, they just created a scheme whereby if you buy 1 pair of flip-flops, you can feed 3 people. And if you buy a pair of slides, you can feed 5 people. So it's a special happening. So go to their website on Indosol. And the second brand we wanted to celebrate today is called Purnama, also coming from, you know, the Balinese essence, because Purnama means full moon in Bahasa Indonesia, and they actually manufacture products to help endangered communities, including women and children in Asia. And they also are now running a donation of a reusable mask, which are handmade by women in Nepal. So go to their website, Puranama. So thank you so much for watching, and see you next Wednesday, because we're doing these lives every Wednesday. Okay, so I think we still have 20 people on Zoom, and there was actually a really cool questions I wanted people to see, which was about HSBC. So it's from Diana. So in Singapore, HSBC just launched its SME green loan. However, it was very vague in stating the kind of sustainable projects that is. So I just want to know, for other banks in perhaps Europe, where green loans have been a norm, what are the metrics to determine if a project is sustainable? Whoa, that's a big question. I don't know if that was clear. Yeah. So it's about understanding the metric to determine if a project is sustainable, basically.
I'm not too, I have to say this is slightly outside of the specific metrics, slightly outside of my my field. So I'm not that well cited, but I think there's a balance to be had with vagueness. I think in that quite often these green loan programs are very, very large, meant to cover a lot of different industries, and meant to be able to be utilized by a lot of different types of projects. And it may not necessarily always be the case that it's easy to just say that we have a single metric which will determine whether something is sustainable or not. But typically what it will come down to is there'll be some sort of assessment of a product's impact on greenhouse gas emissions, normally over the life cycle of the product, and whether that is positive, negative, neutral, relative to some reference case. I think I've seen normally products are available for things that sort of show that 80% of them is invested in sort of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but how you define that, I'm not quite sure. There are definitely different ways of cutting the numbers, but it's definitely very difficult, and something that there's no simple answer to, unfortunately.
Because the definition also of being sustainable changes also simply all the time. Yeah. So we have one last question. So how would you suggest for a new investor to go about researching companies to be sure those companies are not contributing to pollution? And she's saying that most blue chip stocks have such complicated, and it is hard to be certain about the details.
Yeah, sure. I would personally try and focus on, if we're looking at financial products, and obviously these may not be specific or appropriate to every person's financial circumstance, but I would try and look at very specific funds and organizations, because they become much easier for you to understand and to get a sense of whether they're aligned with your own beliefs. I'm more familiar with the UK market, but I know that we have funds that invest purely in renewable energy, funds that invest purely in solar or wind farms. There's a fund called, I think, SDCL, which just all it does is energy efficiency products. It's very easy to understand, because basically all they do is go around and invest your money installing insulation, and you make your return out of the energy savings that people make on their buildings. So I think trying to focus on small specific issues is probably the way forward, at least from my perspective and how I like to go about it. But it can be very difficult to do on a large corporate scale, certainly.
Okay. Do you have time for few questions again, because I'm actually interested also about knowing more, because I was frustrated we didn't go through all of the questions. It's more about, maybe Ben, you want to take that about the renewable energies, because actually in the Planet of Humans, which I watched, and I actually got so panicked after, I cried and everything, got a little emotional. I was like, okay, so we're actually praising with Green is the New Black, you know, renewables and new alternative sources of energy, but are they that sustainable, or should we just look at other technologies, and what's the current state in terms of renewables at the moment?
Well, yeah, and the thing is, and that I said before as well, I think it's scary that Michael Moore was using some of the evidence that he did. It's downright dangerous to the general population to see something like this and not understand the full consequences of the opposite, which is just continuing as business as usual. In either in fossil fuel industry for, you know, coal-fired power plants, or alternatively not looking at more sustainable solutions when it comes to renewable energy. Yes, absolutely, renewable energy itself needs to be sustainable. You know, do we need concrete? Do we need steel to manufacture wind farms? Yes, we do for now. Maybe there's some alternative technologies we need to be researching to make those less emissions intensive, particularly around concrete and steel. And it's the same with the electric vehicle industry as well. You have nickel, cadmium, you have all of these rare earth minerals that are necessary to make the batteries for these vehicles, which are, one, demanding unsustainable practices of mining in developing countries, and two, on the other hand, are very hard to recycle. And when they are recycled, they need to be recycled really effectively, properly, to ensure that, you know, there aren't negative environmental consequences of decommissioning an electric vehicle. As technology develops, we are going to, well, I hope, and we can push for those manufacturers to look for more sustainable solutions for their renewable energy or low emissions solution as well. There's no need to just ignore it. We do need to pay attention to the facts that were in that documentary, but we also need to look through the research ourselves. And I mean, some of the evidence that was used is the same evidence that petrochemical industry uses against electric vehicles. It's quite common arguments that we've seen for a long time from what I hear, has come across in that documentary. But I can't really comment too much more until I see it, but I will watch it tonight if I find some time this evening.
I wouldn't necessarily waste my time on that, to be fair. But just like read articles, and it's fine, I think. But I think there's, and even me, like, you know, when the more I just evolve into that industry, the more I just understand a bit more, and I would never be an expert into any of the topics, but what I hear often is the fact that if we had wanted to, we could have implemented renewable 30 years ago. But is that true in terms of technology and in terms of, you know, the state of renewables at the time?
I don't think so. No, I think we probably could have been 10 years ahead. I think what, you know, as we were saying earlier, the development of the technology required a large amount of public subsidy and support that sort of kind of came into gear in the early noughties. So although we knew about climate change kind of back in the 60s, technically, it wasn't it needed to get to sort of crisis point in order to trigger public funds. You can't, if you're the guys holding the purse strings and you're deciding, you know, do I put my money into schools, houses, the Iraq War, or renewable energy, or whatever it happens to be, it really needs to be it had to get to a crisis point in order for the political will to be there to support the industry, which is sad, but I don't see, just the way that our political system works, how it could have happened. I mean, maybe 10 years earlier, but probably not a huge amount more.
Okay.
Yeah, what's really changed is the policy, finance, and technology shifts over that period of time, as Alex said, caused by the notion of a real crisis. And for many years, financing entities sort of saw perceived renewables as a risky investment because of the high upfront costs, leading to high lending rates for individuals and businesses that needed funding for renewables. But now onshore wind and solar PV are frequently less expensive than any fossil fuel alternative. So, you know, even without financial assistance from governments, even without like mechanisms and things, grant mechanisms, you know, a financial to a property, a project developer sometimes is still needed in developing countries, but in developed countries, not at all anymore. It's very competitive against non-renewables.
Okay. Cool. I don't want to take more of your time, although there's actually a lot more questions. So if you can, that would be really nice of you. Just maybe try to, actually you don't see the questions, right? Because I wanted you to answer them. We have questions from actually social entrepreneurs who want to do stuff in green tech. And he's asking, I am creating a green financing platform that is focused on helping SMEs and investors meet increasing ESG demands through fintech and regtech that helps enhance the profile and processes of companies. Who can I work with to commercialize the platform?
Of course, I'm afraid that's slightly out of my area of expertise. I think there are a number of sort of ESG focused consultants out there that could probably help. And I had a couple in my head, but I'm afraid their names have gone. Sorry, I've been out of touch for a while, but I'm afraid that's not something that's really in my sphere of influence.
Okay, no worries. I think we're gonna do an article recapping everything that you've been saying today. People have been saying that it's been really insightful, so thank you so much for your time. Sorry again for the tech issues at first. We ended up managing to be live on all of the platforms, but I really, really, really appreciated our conversation. Yeah, what you guys are doing is great, very inspiring, and thank you very much. And I wish you a great day, because yes, we're in Europe, all of us.
Thank you. No, and thank you too. What Green is the New Black is doing is really inspiring as well. And likewise, we'd love to. Well, I'm not speaking for Alex, but Eco and I would love to come back and share and have another similar conversation anytime. It's a pleasure. Thank you, and thank you to those listening.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fascinating. It's been really great. Yeah, come back whenever, anytime too.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.